the United Church's partnership is to try and understand how the United Church participates with others in God's mission for wholeness of life in a context that is still struggling, both in Africa, in the Middle East, and here in Canada, with colonization, with the history and the legacy of that, and with the reality, the lived reality of that. What does partnership look like in that context? What does solidarity look like in a colonized and decolonizing context? So that has been my journey for the last 3 months. So in today's presentation, I was going to speak more about that in a very academic way. I don't feel that that's the moment now. Oh, well, not an academic way, but it was going to be sort of more of a presentation. What I'd like to share with you now is some video clips from a YouTube presentation on a panel of women dealing with decolonizing feminism. These women, the panel of women are Black, predominantly African American, Dalit, Roma, and Palestinian. And so for me, as I've watched this clip several times, and every time I've watched the entire clip, the entire video presentation, the panel, I have found nuggets of profound wisdom, challenge, faith, liberation, language that is part of my own building of resistance in my own journey to decolonize solidarity, my own solidarity, and walk and accompany the church and partners on this journey. I just wanted to contextualize that in the terms of partnership before we go to the clips with a comment that was made by a partner in Palestine who said, in the context of the work we're doing now, we are all trying to be together this prophetic voice. However, calling out injustice is not enough. If we don't leverage influence with decision makers, it is useless. And this is a partner speaking out of a context of occupation, in the context of lockdown, in the context of COVID-19. We're in different places right now, and as we witness and listen to the voices of these women that Joshua will help us walk through just now, I invite you to think about where you are at this moment, to reflect on what you witnessed, saw, heard, felt on your TV screens, through social media last week, and then invite and encourage us after we hear from the panel, some very brief clips, to just enter into a moment of conversation about a sort of a check-in. How do we feel about what we've heard and where we're feeling and what we're feeling right now? It will maybe be a little bit chaotic, but I think I can't continue on as if the world isn't being transformed as we speak. So I beg your indulgence and ask Josh to help us through this process.
Within the United States, but the galvanization of the movement for Black Lives and for Black Lives Matter in particular was founded by everyday working people, local organizers in Ferguson who had already been advocating and organizing within their local communities, as well as poor and working class people, and a movement that is led by women, by LGBTQ persons, non-gender conforming persons, which markedly looks different in this particular moment. And furthermore, I think one of the most significant things about the imaginary for Black Lives Matter is that it is a reconfiguration of what does it mean to be human. So whose lives matter within the context of the vicious legacies of white supremacy, right? And so in order to to answer that question, we must affirm and continue to affirm our full dignity, sacred worth, and humanity within the context of the Black liberation struggle, but also recognize that wherever it is happening locally and around the globe. And so such linkages to the Palestinian liberation struggle.
Thanks, Josh. So that is the host of the panel conversation, and I'd really invite you, the link is in the chat, to when you have a moment, and if you feel so called, to have a look at that, to go back through the YouTube video and watch it through. That is the host of the panel, introducing a panel of speakers. And the panel was hosted by Harvard Divinity School in April 2019, but it's as if it was speaking to us last week or this weekend. It felt that timely and that specific. The title of the conversation was Transnational Solidarity for Gender and Racial Equality, Decolonizing Feminism. And the focus was solidarity among intersectional feminists. And as I said, it involved Romani movement, Black Lives Matter movement, Palestinian and Dalit liberation movement women sharing their struggle. And I just wanted to ask Josh if you could switch to the next clip. So I'm just giving you snippets, but I'm hoping that some of this speaks to what I'm trying to evoke.
Originally, I thought I would talk for 2 minutes, and then they shocked me at lunch and said, take 20. And I thought, well, I'm a little nervous now. All right, but I'd like to just talk about this whole process of basically flipping the script. Right now, we have a script in a lot of Western knowledge. This is an epistemological approach, so you should really appreciate this, that basically puts certain groups at the center and positions the rest of us as the others. And I would suggest that we flip that script. So rather than trying to figure out how to get Romani women and Black women and Dalit women and Palestinian women into a preformed feminism, thereby suggesting that what it needs is to be reformed, I think we might need to build it from the bottom up, because that's a losing strategy for me. There's no place for me there. So what I decided to do today in this panel is really talk to you a little bit about my path to feminism and how I view the emergence of Black feminism as in many ways an indigenous Black feminism that is not derivative of white women. Maybe that is the case that we need to make, and maybe that is the case that all of us need to make, such that when I'm further along down the road of Black feminism, I find you, Romani woman, I find you, Dalit women, I find groups who are engaged in similar struggles to look at their own particular historic situations and to ask, what have those struggles looked like in relationship to social injustice and oppression? So it's historically grounded, but it's a way of working with ideas to name one's own experiences to free oneself. So I'm going to talk about Black people in the United States, but I am not necessarily presenting this as the universal story from which everyone must take inspiration. This is a particular story that might contain universal themes that become the basis of solidarity. So I'm interested in building the argument of solidarity from the ground up where we are now. This is not going through the center. And that makes people uncomfortable sometimes. If you're in the center, you don't like the fact that people don't want to talk to you anymore. They want to talk to each other and not through or about you even, unless you're secondary to that particular discussion. Do you see where I'm coming from here? Mm-hmm. All right, that is prefacing the remarks that I brought today. So let me tell you about my path to feminism. For me, Black feminism is a variety of feminism.
So that particular clip speaks to me about a little bit about the struggle the United Church is in around right relations and with Indigenous people and in our partnership work. What does solidarity look like when we are not the center, when that conversation isn't happening in relation to the United Church? isn't happening in relation to the dominant culture. That's a journey, and that can be an uncomfortable journey. But what does partnership and relationship look like, and solidarity look like in that context? I'm going to ask Josh to play the last clip, and then I think just open it up for some conversation and reflection.
Good evening, everybody. In the Dalit movement, we greet each other with the term J-beam, which is a language of justice and a salute of power. But for me, I feel like so much of what my earlier panelists have said, and also I think why we're here in this room today, is that this is not an academic conversation. This is an urgent conversation that really guides the survival, not just of our individual movements, but of our species. And for me, I think the question we have to think about why we are here is, are we here to study our extinction, or are we here to get free? And for me, it's about fucking freedom. And I think that decolonization is a key part of what we need to talk about to be free. Because again, if we keep putting ourselves into our masters' and mistresses' boxes, then how are we able to find our way out with visionary options, not just reactionary strategies? And for me, I think that as someone who is Dalit, you know, I work on the issue of caste apartheid, and this is a system of oppression that is one of the oldest in the world. It's one in which I am told that I'm spiritually defiling to other people because of my caste, and that my caste determines the whole of my life under Brahmanism. It determines where I live, it determines who I'll marry, and it determines my proximity to violence and structural violence. Every hour, 3 Dalits are murdered, 2 are raped, and 3 of our houses are burnt. So just think what's happened in the context of our conversation today. So for me, I have to speak with the urgency of my people, because that violence has been here for centuries. And in fact, the way that I learned about the Roma people, and this is my nerdy self, is I was looking up untouchable, because Dalits were known as formerly untouchable. I looked it up in different languages, and when I found the untouchable word for Greek, it came up with Romani and Gypsy people. And I was like, what is this? And you will never learn about the ancestral connection between the caste-oppressed peoples of the subcontinent and those who are of our diaspora in our Romani kindred. And yet, when we talk about decolonizing our experience, it's not just about white supremacy, it's about Brahmanism. And I think this is also what changes when we have feminism from the bottom. Because as a Dalit woman and as a Dalit feminist, I think that one of my greatest struggles, and the people who were some of the biggest gatekeepers, were not white women, but were upper caste feminists. And upper caste feminists, they know how to speak a lot about white people and colonialism and post-colonial constructs, but post-colonial constructs were never meant to be simply used without an understanding of the internal hegemonies that they hide. So for every academic that you meet that is South Asian, find out if they're from an upper caste. Find out the position that they're taking and who are they hiding in taking that position. And why is it that we study caste and we study the consequences of caste privilege so that we know all about Dalits and we know about the violence, but we don't know what are the networks of privilege that benefit from it? We would never talk about anti-blackness without talking about white supremacy. Why are we not talking about Brahmanism? Because it hides itself. Brahmanism is actually the mother of white supremacy. Because where did Aryans come from? And yet, it hides itself so effectively because, again, we are so much focused on trying to integrate into the master's house instead of blowing it up. And my sense is that our power, our position comes from when we see ourselves through struggle, but also tell our stories of resistance. And I think that my feminist comes from my ancestors.
And so what that panelist evoked is my own struggle and the struggle of many people of color, Black people, of women of color, to work through how we internalize the racism, how we internalize the oppression in a way that prevents us from seeking our own liberation, and how we find ourselves trying to live, to survive within the parameters framed by the dominant culture, by the masters, as the panelist named. So that's an ongoing struggle in the context of partnership, because when I have conversations with partners around some of these issues, there's a fine line between, for many of us who work for the church, who are people of color, of being the face of the church, a predominantly white middle-class church, and being people of color from contexts that have been colonized. And then how do we walk those lines when people say, but you're one of us, and you know that you come with the power and the resources of a church that has a very different history. So that is a fine line that we walk. We have to be very careful about how we nuance and balance those relationships, because they are not our relationships. I am not, my relationship with Palestinians or with people in East and Central Africa is not mine. It is the United Church's relationships. And so I don't get to define that. It is the church that gets to define what that relationship is like, and how it should be. And so this is why, for me, the urgency for the church to work through these issues, to struggle with these issues, because I am not the one who's going to carry this relationship forward into the future. There are others who are doing this already. Many of you are doing this work with partners already, and many will come after us who will carry these relationships. But we get to define, to some extent, what those relationships will be, if they will be just, if they will be liberating, and if they will be relationships of solidarity that we're working to decolonize. And in the context of the violence this past weekend and last week that we witnessed, I find myself asking, how much of this work is the church ready to do? How much of this work is the church engaged in, that is about liberation, that is about reshaping relationships of colonized solidarity? But you may be struggling with other questions today after the violence of last week. And so I would like to, with Josh and Samantha helping to facilitate, maybe open up that conversation to the group gathered here today. I'm not sure how we want to